Before the story begins, if you enjoy slow-paced, profound stories about human dignity, responsibility, and quiet choices, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us continue telling stories that are not flashy, but powerful enough to linger in the hearts of listeners for a long time. The prairie wind blows across the old wooden roofs of the town of Redwood Falls. Here, people don't live by written rules, but by habit, trustworthiness, and who is reliable when things get tough. Late that afternoon, the train came to a familiar, dry, metallic halt. No one paid much attention until a woman stepped onto the platform. She wore a simple, dark dress without any elaborate jewelry. Her luggage was minimal. She had a calm demeanor. Her gaze neither scrutinized the town nor sought a welcome. Her name was Clara Whitmore. Clara arrived in Redwood Falls as a mail-order bride, a woman betrothed to Samuel Reed, the town's grocery store owner, a widower, principled, taciturn man, and trusted by everyone for never breaking a promise. Samuel waited at the end of the platform. He didn't ask about Clara's past. He didn't inquire about why she had chosen this place. He simply nodded, helped with her luggage, and said, "Let's go home." It was that silence that made Clara feel safe. No one in Redwood Falls knew that Clara had once been a doctor. No one knew she had received a formal education in the East, having stood in lecture halls where women had to sit behind curtains so as not to distract the men. And Clara had no intention of letting anyone know. She didn't come here to prove she was better than anyone else. She came to live a peaceful life, to be a wife, a decent person, to blend into the rhythm of a town where women are expected to be sensible, not knowledgeable. Samuel treated Clara with quiet respect. No controlling, no inquisitiveness, no asking questions he didn't need to know the answers to. Clara told herself that here, I just need to live properly. The past can be left behind, but there are some things that don't allow people to have peace for long. Just weeks after Clara arrived in Redwood Falls, the fevers began to appear. First, a hired hand near the train station, then a laundrywoman, no fuss, no alarm, just names quietly disappearing from everyday life, until people were forced to admit something terrifying. The epidemic had reached the town, and from that moment, the silence Clara chose was no longer a harmless option. Redwood Falls is not a place where panic easily sets in. The town has endured longer than expected winters, unannounced crop failures, and delayed trains carrying both bad news and news that never arrived. The people here are accustomed to enduring in silence, so when the epidemic started, nobody immediately gave it a name. Initially, people would just say, "He has a bad cold. She's overworked. The weather this year is terrible." Clara Whitmore heard those words every day while standing in Samuel's grocery store. She stood behind the counter, arranging goods, taking down accounts, listening to the town's rhythm, and noticed something that made her uneasy. That rhythm was becoming erratic. There are familiar faces that suddenly disappear from the morning bread market. There are houses that remain closed all day, curtains drawn. And there are persistent dry coughs, even though the cougher tries to cover their mouth with their sleeve. Samuel didn't say much, but he noticed it too. A salesman couldn't fail to notice when people bought less and less, not because they were poorer, but because they were weaker. "Something's not right," Samuel said one evening, as the two of them sat eating in the small kitchen at the back of the shop. Clara didn't answer immediately. She put down her spoon and kept her hands still. She knew exactly what was happening. She had seen these signs before, in other places at other times. A persistent fever, unexplained fatigue. It spreads silently through water, through bedding, through unwashed hands. Typhus. The name flashed through her mind so clearly it sent a chill down her spine. But Clara didn't say anything. It wasn't because she doubted her own knowledge. Rather, it was because she understood the consequences of speaking out too soon. In Redwood Falls, a newcomer woman, without any qualifications or status, who dared to diagnose in place of the town doctor, would not be seen as saving a life. They would consider it an insult to order. And in times of instability, order, even if wrong, is clung to more tightly than truth. In the following days, the number of people falling ill increased. The town doctor, an elderly man, worked tirelessly. He employed familiar methods, prescribed medicine according to the books, and strived to keep up, but something was slipping beyond his grasp. Clara arrived at the health center as a family member. She wasn't wearing any other clothes. She didn't identify herself. She simply stood in the corner of the room, observing. And what she feared most wasn't the illness. Rather, chaos is forming. Severely ill and mildly ill patients are mixed together. Those with high fevers are moved away simply because they arrived later. Family members stay too long at the bedside, becoming exhausted, and then they themselves fall ill. Things didn't collapse because of a lack of medicine. They collapsed because of a lack of order. Clara couldn't sleep that night. She sat by the window, gazing at the deserted main road. She thought about what would happen if the epidemic spread. She thought about Samuel, the man who had given her a place to stand without asking who she was. If she tells the truth, she might save someone, but she could also ruin the life she's just begun. In this day and age, an intelligent woman is not seen as a blessing, she is seen as a threat. And Clara understood one bitter truth. Society doesn't punish ignorance. Society punishes abnormality. The following day, the old Caldwell barn was repurposed as a quarantine facility. Thick wooden doors were slammed shut, not just to keep out the disease, but to keep out the fear. Iron beds were brought in hastily. Oil lamps hung from the rafters. White lime was sprinkled on the floor like a crude prayer. The smell of disinfectant mingled with the smell of sweat, fever, and that very distinct smell of despair. Clara stood at a distance, watching. No one invited her, no one asked her to, but she knew from this moment on, every wrong decision would be fatal. The town doctor looked more tired each day. He wasn't weak. He was just alone, and Clara understood. No one could remain sane when burdened with the responsibility of hundreds of lives, without a system, without support. One afternoon, a young woman collapsed right outside the quarantine facility. Not from illness, but from exhaustion after 3 sleepless days caring for her husband and child. Clara stepped forward without thinking. She helped the woman. It was a small act, but it was right. No one objected. And from that moment, Clara understood a simple truth. Sometimes there's no need to declare who you are. Just do what needs to be done. She started returning to the quarantine area every day, not in my capacity as a doctor, not in my capacity for power. She volunteered to help with chores, changing bed sheets, mopping floors, boiling water. She observed, listened, and remembered. Gradually, she rearranged the little things, placing those with high fevers near the heater, separating those who were healthier to the side, reminding everyone to wash their hands longer, and closing the doors on time. Nobody called it directive, they just saw things became less chaotic. And during a pandemic, less chaos has been a life-saving measure. Some people started asking for her opinion, not because they believed she was a doctor, but because they found that things ran more smoothly when they listened to her. Clara was neither happy nor afraid. She felt a familiar burden returning. the burden of knowing exactly what to do, but not being allowed to go wrong. One evening, when the quarantine area was quieter than usual, Clara sat alone on the wooden steps. The prairie wind blew, carrying the scent of damp grass. She looked at her hands, cracked and trembling slightly from exhaustion, and she wondered very softly, as if she didn't want herself to hear, if we stopped for just one day, how many people would Redwood Falls lose? That's not a question for someone who wants to be a hero. That's the question of someone who understands that when no one else can stand, responsibility will fall on the person who can. And Clara Whitmore understood very well. Her silence had begun to take effect. Redwood Falls began to change in ways that no one wanted to admit, not through shouting, not through riots, but through absence. In the morning, Samuel Reed's grocery store opened as usual, but fewer people came in, not because they didn't need flour or salt, but because they lacked the strength to leave their homes. The dirt roads, once filled with the sounds of horse-drawn carriages, were now eerily quiet. Curtains were drawn even during the day. And each time the church bells rang, people paused for a moment, and it was obvious why. Clara Whitmore felt that more acutely than anyone else. She didn't just see the disease. She saw the weariness accumulating throughout the community. At the Caldwell quarantine facility, beds filled up faster than expected. They had to be placed very close together. Social distancing, the most important factor in preventing the spread of the virus, was sacrificed for the sake of urgency. The town doctor hardly ever left the place anymore. He worked from early morning until the oil lamp ran out, but the harder he tried, the more things slipped from his grasp. It wasn't because he lacked knowledge, rather, it was because no one could fight against chaos alone. Clara stood watching and knew that without clear order, this quarantine zone would collapse before the pandemic peaked. One afternoon, a mistake occurred. A boy with a high fever was moved to the ward for mild cases, simply because there was an empty bed there. By evening, 3 people in that ward had started developing fevers. No one did it intentionally. No one was irresponsible. It was just a wrong decision made while tired. And Clara understood decisions like these would be repeated more and more often until Redwood Falls no longer had enough people to correct them. She went to see the town doctor. This is not for debate. This is not for challenging. She only spoke very slowly and very clearly. We need to reclassify the patients, and we need someone to keep proper records. Otherwise he'll collapse before the disease does. The doctor looked at her. He wasn't angry. He didn't ask who she was either. He just sighed. "I know," he said. "But I have no one left." Clara nodded. That very sentence was what she feared most. It's not opposition, it's helplessness. From that day on, Clara was no longer just helping out. She started organizing, not by command, not by title. She did it in a way that those who have lived in border regions for a long time understand well. Do it first, do it right, and do it consistently. She categorized patients by severity. She suggested shorter shifts to avoid burnout. She requested that every change be recorded, time, reactions, progress. Not everyone is satisfied. Some people grumbled that she was too principled. Others said she didn't know her place. But then, as each night passed, the number of severe cases decreased. Fewer people died from misdiagnosis. Fewer people fell ill from exhaustion. And Redwood Falls, though still painful, slowed down enough to breathe. Samuel Reed saw that change. He did not enter the quarantine zone. He did not interfere. But every evening, when Clara came home late, he would have warm water and a cold meal ready for her. He wouldn't ask how her day had been. He would just say, "Eat." That's how men in this region show their support, by not getting in the way of someone who's already doing a heavy job. But Clara's presence became increasingly apparent. People started calling her name. At first, it was a whisper. Then, it was direct. "Ms. Whitmore, where should this case be placed? Ms. Whitmore, can this person be moved out yet?" And along with that trust came a look of suspicion. In Redwood Falls, people are accustomed to the old order. Doctors are doctors, women are women. A woman without official status is in charge of running the quarantine facility. That's something many people are uncomfortable with. Rumors began to circulate. Where did she study? Who does she rely on? Who does she think she is? Clara heard everything, but she didn't stop. It's not because she's stronger than others. It's because she understands one thing. While the pandemic is still ongoing, the truth doesn't need to be loved. It just needs to be done right. Then the inevitable happened. A patient died during the night. A middle-aged man who arrived at the isolation ward too late. His family was distraught. Someone shouted, if he had received care sooner, he would have lived. No one said Clara's name, but all eyes were on her. She stood still, no justification, no rebuttal, because she knew that in times of pain, people need someone to blame. The town doctor came out, his voice hoarse with exhaustion. He arrived in a very critical condition, he said. We did everything we could. That statement didn't appease anyone, but Clara did not back down. That evening, she sat alone outside the Caldwell warehouse. The wind was blowing stronger than usual. The sky was starless. She understood that from now on she wasn't just facing illness. She was facing judgment. And if there's one thing more dangerous than typhus, it's when a community starts to split apart in fear. The next day, Clara did something she had been avoiding from the beginning. She spoke directly with the town's governing body, not to claim to be a doctor, but to set a principle. If we don't agree on a way to do it, she said, her voice calm, then every next death will not be from disease but from chaos. Some people objected. Some people were annoyed, but Samuel Reed stood up. He wasn't talking about Clara, he was talking about the town. We can debate that later, he said, but right now, I'm just asking one thing. Who among us has a better way of doing things? Right now? No one answered. And in that silence, Clara understood. She had just crossed a line of no return. From this moment on, she was no longer a maid. She became the one in charge. No title, no guarantee of protection. There is only one way. Keep doing the right thing and accept the consequences. That night, Clara came home very late. Samuel didn't ask any questions. He just looked at her, then said slowly, if anything happens, I'll be here. No promises, no loud commitments. It's just a place. Close enough not to feel lonely, far enough not to feel constrained. Clara nodded. She knew that from now on, every decision she made would not only affect lives, but also how this town would remember her. But sometimes, people don't get to choose how they will be remembered. People only get to choose what they will do when no one else dares to step forward. And Clara Whitmore made the choice. After that brief meeting, Redwood Falls didn't explode. It froze. No one openly opposed Clara Whitmore, but the spontaneous nods of approval were gone too. In border regions, people don't need to shout to express resistance. They just need to stop cooperating. Some people started to slow down. Some shifts were delayed. Some records were forgotten to be completed. Nobody called it opposition. They called it fatigue, a misunderstanding, a minor issue. But Clara saw it very clearly. The most fragile order always crumbles from small things. The pandemic doesn't wait for anyone to resolve internal conflicts. Just 3 days later, Redwood Falls reached what Clara feared most, the peak of the pandemic. The beds in the Caldwell storage facility are completely full. There's no more space for proper isolation. Mildly ill patients are forced to be closer to severely ill patients than is permissible. The town doctor collapsed one early morning. It wasn't because of typhus, it was because of exhaustion. He collapsed right there at his desk, pen still clutched in his hand. For the first time since the pandemic began, no one knew what to do next. At that moment, Redwood Falls faced the truth. Only Clara Whitmore remained standing. No one has declared that. No one has officially delegated the authority. But all eyes were on her. And at the same time, suspicion doubled. A woman. No degree hanging on the wall. No appointment.
A life or death decision for the entire town. Someone whispered, "We're putting too much in the hands of one person." Clara heard it, and she understood. This was the most dangerous time for someone doing the right thing. It's not about failure, it's about success that hasn't yet received official recognition. She didn't react, she didn't offer any explanation. She did the only thing that still made sense. Tightened discipline even further. She divided the shifts into shorter cycles. She forbade family members from staying overnight. She demanded such strict record-keeping that it annoyed many people. "We're not the army," someone said. Clara replied in a flat voice, "But illness doesn't wait for anyone." One evening, a conflict erupted. A drunken man stormed the door of the quarantine area,
demanding to see his wife. He was shouting, banging on the door, and cursing. Others stepped back. Someone called the police. Clara stepped out. She didn't yell, she didn't argue. She stood blocking the thick wooden door, staring directly at him. "If you go in," she said slowly, "you could bring the disease out. And if you do, not just your wife, but the whole town will pay the price." The man paused. Not because he was convinced, but because it was the first time someone had spoken to him like a responsible adult. He stepped back. He didn't apologize. But he didn't attack again either. News of that spread quickly. Not everyone supported Clara. But from that day on, no one dared to break down the doors of the quarantine area anymore. Samuel Reed saw it all. He knew very well that once Clara had stood blocking the door, there was no turning back for her. That evening, Samuel said only one thing. "If they need someone to sign papers, I'll sign them." It wasn't because he understood medicine, it was because he understood how power worked in this region. People trust those who keep their promises for a long time more than those who are eloquent speakers. The following days were the hardest. The dead still exist. Clara is not under any illusions, but one thing has changed noticeably. People no longer die by mistake. Every death has a clear reason. Every decision is recorded. That doesn't make the pain disappear, but it keeps the pain from turning into hatred. One morning, an elderly woman came to see Clara. She wasn't angry. She was just tired. "You did the right thing," she said, "but you have to understand, people are afraid." Clara nodded. "I'm scared too," she replied. And that was the first time someone saw Clara not as a controller, but as a person burdened with too much. That same day, bad news arrived. Cases have appeared in the area near the stream that leads to the southern indigenous region. If the disease spreads there, Redwood Falls will face not only illness, but also conflict. Some people suggested closing the road. Others said they should let them figure it out themselves. Clara didn't get angry after hearing that. She only asked one question. If they die, where will the water flow? No one answered, because everyone knows the answer. The pandemic knows no boundaries. Only humans draw boundaries to evade responsibility. Clara suggested sending soap, clean cloths, and instructions on disease prevention to the other area. Some people strongly objected. "We don't even have enough for ourselves," Clara replied. "If they fall first, we'll be next." Samuel stood up again. "We didn't choose this," he said, "but we chose to confront it." Finally, they agreed. Reluctantly, but they agreed. Clara couldn't sleep that night. She sat at her desk, watching her notebook grow thicker day by day. She knew perfectly well, from now on, if things went well, her name wouldn't be credited. But if anything went wrong, she would be the first to be held accountable. That's the price of being in the middle. But Clara also understood something deeper. If those who are capable of stepping forward do not do so, the price the community will pay will be far higher. The next morning, Clara put on her coat and tied her hair back neatly. She walked into the quarantine area as usual, not with the posture of a winner, but with the posture of someone who doesn't allow themselves to fall before the job is done. Redwood Falls remains in danger, but for the first time since the pandemic began, the town is no longer drifting aimlessly. And Clara Whitmore understood. From the moment she chose to stand in front of that door, her old life, her refuge, had ended. What lies ahead is not safety. It's about taking responsibility to the very end. Redwood Falls isn't going to improve immediately. No one wakes up one morning and realizes the pandemic has receded. It just slowed down. The number of new cases is not increasing as rapidly as before. The calls in the night are becoming less frequent. And some patients, after days of lying motionless, are beginning to open their eyes, albeit weakly. During a pandemic, slowing down is a very cautious form of hope. No one dares to name it too loudly. Clara Whitmore did not allow herself to celebrate prematurely. She knew that just because the peak of the pandemic had passed didn't mean the danger was over. A moment of complacency would bring everything back to how it was before, or worse. Therefore, discipline remains in place. Record-keeping continues. No one is allowed to breathe a sigh of relief. That very inflexibility began to create a different reaction in the town. Weariness mixed with resentment. "We're doing much better now," someone said. "Why are you still so strict?" Clara listened, but didn't change her mind. She understood a very old, very true truth. People often ruin the best things the moment they show signs of appearing. One morning, Samuel Reed brought news. The delivery man from the south said that the indigenous community across the stream also had sick people. Not many, but there were familiar symptoms. Redwood Falls im Lang. No one said it out loud, but everyone thought the same thing. If the outbreak happened there, it wouldn't just be a problem for one town anymore. Clara nodded slowly. "We need to know what they're doing," she said, "and they need to know what we're doing." Some people object, some people are afraid, but Samuel stepped forward, as he had done many times in recent weeks. "Not to be friendly," he said, "but to survive." Finally, they chose a liaison officer, Ethan Cross. Ethan was a rare man who didn't belong entirely to either side. He had left Redwood Falls many years ago, then returned with his wife, a local woman. He held no office. He didn't speak much, but he understood that both sides feared the same thing. Before Ethan left, Clara met with him. She didn't give lengthy instructions. She just said one sentence. "If they have a way to help patients breathe through the night, I need to know." Ethan looked at her for a moment, then nodded. "She will listen," he said. "That's enough." 3 days later, Ethan returned. Quiet, no commotion. He only brought along one elderly man, upright in posture, with neatly tied back grey hair, wearing an old leather jacket. He didn't introduce himself immediately. He just stood still in front of the Caldwell warehouse door, observing. Clara stepped out. The two looked at each other, neither scrutinizing nor challenging. Finally, the man spoke, his voice low and slow. "I heard there are people here who manage to maintain order when illness strikes." Clara didn't respond to the compliment. She asked the only question that mattered. "What did you see?" The man, Old Bear standing, walked into the quarantine area. He didn't touch anyone right away. He just stood there, observing their breathing, skin color, and coughs. Finally, he said, "This disease doesn't kill quickly. It kills by slowly taking away your breath." Clara nodded. She already knew that. Old Bear standing opened the small cloth bag on his side. He took out bundles of dried roots and leaves, carefully air-dried. He didn't explain his origins. He didn't tell stories about his ancestors. Clara didn't ask either. She only asked, "How does it help?" Old Bear, standing, pointed to a man who was breathing heavily. "It doesn't cure," he said. "It buys time. During a pandemic, time is the most precious commodity." Clara didn't use it right away. She took notes. She selected a case that had passed the most critical stage but was still having difficulty breathing. She monitored it hour by hour. No one objected, because in the order Clara established there was no room for blind faith, only room for results. That night, the patient's breathing became more regular. It's not a miracle, it's not miraculous, just lasts for one night. Clara wrote it down. She didn't write the name of the remedy, she only noted breathing became more stable after 6 hours. Old Bear standing doesn't accept praise. Nor does he seek recognition. He just sat by the fire, drinking hot water, waiting for the result. The next day, Clara tried combining the small dose with the old method. She was watching closely. No one spoke up. In Redwood Falls at this time, one important lesson had been learned. Those who work diligently don't need to talk much. The news began to spread, slowly and cautiously. "That person is asleep now. The cough has subsided. It hasn't gotten worse." No one would call it a miracle. They call it an opportunity. But at the same time, something else spread. Suspicion. What is she using? Isn't it medication prescribed by the doctor? Is it safe? Clara heard it, and she understood this was the most dangerous moment for her secret. Because if just one person asks the right question, "Where did you learn this?" everything will change. One afternoon, the town doctor regained consciousness. He was weak, but alert. Clara stood by the bed, handing over the notebook. He read for a very long time. Don't ask about strange remedies. Don't ask about Old Bear standing. He only asked, "Where did you study medicine?" The room was silent. Even this is the question Clara has been avoiding for weeks. She can evade the issue. She can lie. But there are moments when the truth is no longer a personal choice. Clara looked straight at him. "In the East," she said, "before coming here." The doctor closed his eyes, not angry, not surprised, just tired. "I guess so," he said. Nobody could organize something like this without having stood there before. He opened his eyes and looked at Clara. "You know," he said slowly, "if this gets out, it won't be easy for you." Clara nodded. "I know," she replied, "but if I don't do it, it won't be easy for anyone." The doctor remained silent. Then he said something that Clara didn't expect. "Well then, let's continue. Not an appointment, not a defense. It's simply the act of giving way to someone who understands that at this moment, the ego must step aside." That evening, Clara came home very late. Samuel left the light on. She told him the story without detail, without dramatizing it. Samuel listened. Then he said, "They'll know tomorrow?" Clara nodded. "I know." Samuel looked at her for a long time. "No matter what," he said. "You've kept this town standing when it was on the verge of collapse." Not words of comfort, just timely recognition. Clara sat down. For the first time in weeks, she felt genuinely tired. "I'm not tired from work. I'm tired from preparing to face the spotlight." She knew that tomorrow, when the truth came out, Redwood Falls would no longer look at her the same way. But there are some paths, once you've gone far enough, that leave no room for turning back. And Clara Whitmore understood perfectly well what she was about to lose was not as important as what this town had a chance to retain. The truth doesn't spread by the ringing of a bell. It spread through whispers, dropped when people thought no one was listening. A gaze that lingered longer than usual. A question left unanswered. In Redwood Falls, people began saying that Clara Whitmore was more than just a good organizer. Initially, it was just a guess. Then it became a half-truth. Finally, it was a direct question. "You studied medicine, right?" That question was posed on the busiest morning at the Caldwell quarantine facility, where everyone was tired, stressed, and no one had the patience for ambiguity left. Clara was reviewing the shift schedule when she heard it. She didn't turn around immediately. She finished the last line of her notes, put down her pen, and then looked up. "Yes," she said. No explanation, no embellishment, just one word, but it was enough to silence the room. Some people held their breath. Some frowned. Some immediately looked toward the town doctor as if waiting for a denial. But the doctor said nothing. That silence weighs more heavily than any confirmation. One man spoke first, his voice not angry, but cold. "So, you've been hiding it from the beginning?" Clara looked at him. "No," she replied. "I didn't say that. Those are two different things." That answer annoyed some people. In Redwood Falls, people are used to everything being clearly named. Hiding things is bad. Not saying anything is also considered bad. But Clara didn't argue. She understood this was no longer the time to defend reputation. This was the time to defend the order upon which they stood. A woman burst into tears. "My husband is dead," she said. "If you're a doctor, why wasn't he saved?" No one blamed her. That was the most painful question, and also the most dangerous one. Clara took a step forward. "He arrived too late," she said. "And no matter who I am, that doesn't change. No promises, no evasions. It's just the harsh truth, something that's hard to accept when you're hurting." The atmosphere began to become tense. Some people say Clara should be temporarily suspended. Others demand that the power of decision be returned to those in authority. Samuel Reed stood behind them, remaining silent. He understood that if he spoke up for Clara now, it would become a privilege, not a responsibility. Clara raised her hand, not to ask for silence, but to restore order. "We can argue," she said, her voice even. "But if we do that now, someone will die tonight." The room became somber. It wasn't because they believed her, it was because they knew she was right. Clara continued, "I'm not asking for trust. I'm just asking to continue working, doing what is keeping the number of living people greater than the number of dead." No one applauded. No one publicly approved. But no one stepped forward to replace him. That was the moment Redwood Falls realized something hard to swallow. They had no better option. The following days were difficult. Clara continued working. but the way people looked at her had changed. It's no longer just doubt. It's a matter of weighing the options. People are weighing the options between the fact that she didn't reveal her identity and her main role was to keep them alive, balancing the inner turmoil with the undeniable reality of being in a hospital bed. Some people couldn't stand it and left. Others stayed, not because they believed Clara, but because they believed the numbers. Old Bear Standing is still there. He didn't intervene in the debate. He didn't defend Clara. He didn't explain his knowledge. He simply continued to observe the patient as if nothing else mattered. One evening, when the quarantine area was quieter, he said to Clara, "What people fear most is not illness. They fear being discovered to have relied on someone they once suspected." Clara smiled very slightly. "I know," she replied. The following day, another event occurred. A critically ill patient, one who had publicly opposed Clara, began to suffer severe respiratory distress. Without immediate intervention, he wouldn't survive the night. His family stood outside the door, too afraid to look at Clara. The town doctor was too weak to handle the situation directly. All eyes turned to Clara again. This time, without accusation, it's just the naked weight. Clara didn't hesitate. She adjusted the dosage. She applied the documented combination method. She asked everyone to remain still. No unnecessary words. That night, the man lived, not conscious, not well, but live. The next morning, the news spread, or no one needed to tell it. Not everyone changes their attitude immediately, but a line has been drawn. One can no longer say that Clara was simply lucky. The town doctor called Clara in. He sat leaning against the bed, his voice weak. "You don't have to do that," he said. "You can let me take responsibility." Clara shook her head. "No," she replied. "We'll bear it together. That way, this town won't be divided." The doctor closed his eyes. That wasn't protest. It was belated acceptance. A small meeting was held. No declaration, no vote. It was simply an unspoken agreement. Clara would continue to run the quarantine facility. Every medical decision had to be documented and reviewed. No one had special privileges, not even Clara. That wasn't a victory, it's a survival agreement. Samuel said to Clara that evening. "They haven't forgiven me yet." Clara nodded. "I don't need that," she replied. "Just don't vandalize it." Samuel looked at her for a long time. "You know," he said slowly, "people aren't angry because you're good. They're angry because you made them realize they were wrong." Clara did not answer. Because she understood that was the price of doing the right thing in silence for too long. In the following days, the epidemic continued to recede slowly, not because of one person, not because of one cure. But order has withstood the test of doubt. Clara worked with less talk than before, not out of fear, but because she understood when the truth is revealed, actions are the only thing left to speak for themselves. One afternoon, as the sun was low, Clara stood outside the Caldwell warehouse. She was tired, but not empty. She knew that from now on, Redwood Falls would never look at her the way it did the first day she got off the train. But from now on, she no longer has to live in her own shadow. The truth, albeit late, has come to light. And Clara Whitmore understood this very well. Maintaining trust is harder than earning it. But if there's one thing worth holding on to, it's our responsibility to those who are breathing. Right now, Redwood Falls has entered a different phase. It's not peace. It's a fragile stability. The pandemic isn't gone, but it's no longer attacking in massive numbers as before. Sleepless nights filled with calls for emergency help are becoming less frequent. and in the Caldwell quarantine facility, for the first time, there are empty beds. No one cheered. It has been learned that during an epidemic, celebrating too soon is a form of carelessness. Clara Whitmore maintained her discipline. Do not relax shift schedules. Do not allow excessive flexibility. Do not skip record keeping for even a single day. But one thing changed, and Clara felt it most acutely. She started to get tired in a different way. I'm not tired from overwork. I'm tired from always being in the center of attention. Since the truth came out, every decision has fallen on her. Every question, every doubt,
Every responsibility. Some people believe her, some don't. But in any case, everyone waited for her to speak first. And that's a new form of danger. One morning, Clara forgot to eat. It wasn't because she was busy. It was because her mind was used to always being in a state of readiness. Samuel realized it before she did. He placed the bowl of porridge in front of her without saying anything. Only when she had eaten half a bowl did he speak. You can't keep things stable if you yourself are tilting. Clara stopped. She didn't argue because she knew he was right. But knowing what is right doesn't mean knowing how to do it. In Redwood Falls, people are accustomed to the old model. One person is in charge, the rest follow. In times of crisis, that model is even more readily accepted because it's simple.
But Clara understood if everything continued to depend on her alone, the town was only delaying another collapse. The question isn't whether she falls or not. The question is, if she falls, who will stand up for her? She decided to change, quiet. No announcements, she began assigning tasks based on ability, not social standing. Those with good record-keeping skills were assigned to manage the files. Those with good discipline were in charge of shifts. Those familiar with the kitchen were responsible for hygiene and clean water. Some people were surprised. Some people didn't like it. For the first time, they weren't assigned tasks based on who's who, but on what they could do. Several reactions occurred. "She's turning us into machines," someone said. Clara replied very calmly, "No. I'm making everyone the one responsible." That difference isn't something everyone understands right away. But then the effects started to appear. When Clara was absent for an afternoon, because she needed to rest as advised by her doctor, the isolation ward continued to operate, not perfect, not as smooth as when she was there. But there was no chaos. That was a crucial moment. No one said it out loud, but everyone understood. Redwood Falls was learning to stand without a single walking stick. Old Bear Standing realized that sooner than others. One afternoon, as the two of them sat by the fire behind Caldwell's shed, he said, "The best healer is the one who knows when to take a step back." Clara looked at him. "I'm afraid if I back down, everything will fall apart." Old Bear Standing shook his head. "If things only stand when you stand there," he said slowly, "then they never truly stood." Those words stayed with Clara for a long time. In the following days, Clara deliberately avoided appearing anywhere. It wasn't about giving up. It was about seeing who would step up when the opportunity arose, and indeed, someone stepped forward. It's not the talkative people, it's the people who have quietly done the right thing for weeks. A woman who once doubted Clara now manages the night shift very well. A man who once opposed discipline is now the one who reminds others to wash their hands thoroughly. No one claims they have changed their beliefs. They have only changed their actions, Samuel observed from a distance. He didn't interfere, he didn't direct. He understood that this was a stage where a community was examining itself. But at the same time, another danger was silently emerging. Stability, however fragile, begins to breed complacency. Someone said, "We're almost there." "We can ease up a little." Clara listened and felt a chill run down her spine. She knew very well that many disasters begin precisely when people believe they have the situation under control. She convened a small meeting. Not long, not intense. She wasn't talking about fear. She was talking about data. "The number of cases is decreasing," she said, "dear, but if we abandon discipline now, we won't get back to this pace." No one argued, because this time Clara wasn't the only one speaking. Those who were tasked with speaking out alongside her did so without defending her, simply presenting the facts from their own perspective. That was the first time Redwood Falls didn't need Clara to take the lead, and that, paradoxically, made her position stronger than ever. That evening, Clara came home earlier than usual. Samuel is repairing the fence behind the house. The two worked side by side in silence. After a while, Samuel said, "You know, they don't say follow Clara anymore." Clara looked up. "What did they say?" "They said it was in the way it's working." Clara smiled very slightly. That was what she desired most, and also what was most difficult to achieve. It's not about loyalty to people, it's about loyalty to doing things the right way. In the following days, the epidemic continued to recede, not fast, not spectacular. But it was consistent enough to make people believe that if they maintained this pace, they would survive. Clara started sleeping a little more. Not soundly, but she no longer woke up in the middle of the night afraid she'd forgotten something. One morning she stood before the old train station, the place where she had once stepped off the train into this town as a stranger. She realized this was no longer a place to hide, but it is no longer a hostile place either. Redwood Falls hadn't fully accepted Clara Whitmore as a doctor. Perhaps they would never call her by that name, but they accepted something even more important, that a person's worth is proven by how many people they leave behind to stand strong after them. And Clara understood her hardest lesson wasn't about standing in the middle of a storm, rather, it's about knowing when to step back so that others can learn to stand with you. Redwood Falls no longer wakes up in fear as it used to. Mornings return to their old rhythm. Shops opened early. Horse-drawn carriages rolled slowly along the dirt road, and the aroma of warm bread wafted from Samuel Reed's back kitchen. The Caldwell quarantine station was still operational, but the clamour of calls had subsided. People began talking about the upcoming harvest, about the goods to be ordered when the ships arrived, about seemingly small things, but signs that life was returning. The pandemic isn't completely over, but it has receded enough for people to start thinking about tomorrow. And as people begin to think about tomorrow, they also begin to ask other questions. The question is no longer how to survive. Instead, it's who will decide everything from here. Clara Whitmore sensed that shift immediately, not through words, but through the way people looked at her. The fear in his eyes had lessened, but it also seemed less necessary. Before, people had to ask Clara about everything. Now they ask each other first, and only then, if absolutely necessary, do they ask her. That's not turning our backs. It's a sign of a community standing up for itself. And for Clara, that was both true and painful. One afternoon, as Clara was checking the medicine storeroom, a man walked in. He was more neatly dressed than most other men in town, a dark coat, a stiff-brimmed hat, the gait of someone accustomed to being given way. He introduced himself as Mr. Harrington, a representative from the Regional Health Office. "We've heard that Redwood Falls has handled the pandemic quite well," he said, his tone formal, "especially thanks to the unofficial measures." Clara understood immediately. This is the kind of person who shows up after the danger has passed to ask who did what, and by what standards. Mr. Harrington walked through the quarantine area. He looked at the logbook. He asked about the procedures. He neither attacked nor acknowledged anything. Finally, he stopped in front of Clara. "She doesn't have a license to practice in this area," he said. Not accusing, just stating the facts. "She knows that," Clara nodded. "I know." Then Mr. Harrington continued, "When the pandemic is officially declared over, your role here will need to be reconsidered. Not a threat. Not a deportation order. It's simply a return to the old order, where everything had to have a name, a seal, and a clear location. News of the visit spread very quickly. Some people were annoyed, some people felt relieved, because deep down, many people still feel uncomfortable when their order is maintained by someone who is not part of the system." Clara didn't react. She continued working as usual, but that evening, as she and Samuel sat at the dinner table, the inevitable question was asked. "If they ask you to leave," Samuel asked very slowly, "what will you do?" Clara was silent for a long time. She had thought about it, but thinking about it is different from saying it out loud. "I don't know," she answered honestly. Samuel didn't ask any further questions. He understood. This wasn't a question that needed an immediate answer. This was a question of a turning point. In the days that followed, Clara began to see Redwood Falls in a different light. It's no longer a place where she's needed to survive. Instead, it's a place that can continue without her at the center. The quarantine center was functioning well. The teams in charge knew their jobs. Old Bear Standing quietly left one early morning, leaving a brief message. "When people know how to keep each other breathing, we don't need to stay." The town doctor, now in better health, returned to work in parts. No power struggles, no denial of what had happened. Just do your job in the new order. And that made Clara realize an unpleasant truth. Her role was being fulfilled. One afternoon, Clara walked past the old train station. She stepped off the plane like a stranger. No one knew who she was. No one asked. Now, if she were standing there, people would recognize her. But realizing it doesn't mean you need to keep it. Mr. Harrington returned again, carrying the official document. No harshness, no rushing. "We'll be sending someone to officially take over the medical duties in the next few weeks," he said. "You can help with the transition, then everything will get back to normal." Clara read the text. No accusations, no thanks. It's simply the legal end of an exceptional period. That evening, Samuel went to the backyard and repaired the fence, which had become shaky after the long winter. Clara stood and watched. "You can stay," Samuel said without turning around. "Not in that capacity, but as Clara." Clara understood what he meant. Stay to be a wife. Stay to be the woman behind the shop counter. Stay to a peaceful life, free from the responsibilities of life and death, the life she had always wanted. But Clara also understood something else. People cannot completely return to their former positions after having been in such a place. She saw what she could do when everything fell apart. And once she knew that, there was no way to pretend to forget. "I need time," she said. Samuel nodded. "I'm not in a hurry," he replied. "I just need you to choose without regret." The final days of the pandemic passed in silence. People cleaned up the quarantine station. They burned the old blankets and sheets. They recorded the data. Some people came to thank Clara, very quietly. Some avoided eye contact, also very quietly. Nobody wants to make a big deal out of it, because in their hearts, Clara Whitmore is a memory of an extraordinary time. There was a time when the old order was no longer sufficient, and they were forced to rely on something else. That morning, Clara stood in the small room behind the health clinic, rearranging her notebooks. Each page represents a decision. Each line represents a human life. She didn't bring everything. She only selected what was necessary so that those who came after wouldn't have to start from scratch. Before leaving, she placed the stack of notebooks on the table. Don't sign in large letters. Just write in the bottom corner. Maintain discipline. Maintain integrity. When Clara stepped outside, the sun was shining gently. There was no noise, no farewells. Redwood Falls is making a comeback. And Clara Whitmore understood there are places we go not to stay, but to help them stand on their own 2 feet, and then quietly leave when they no longer need us. The question is no longer whether she should leave. Rather, it's about how to leave without shattering what has already been preserved, and the answer awaits her ahead. Redwood Falls entered the early days of its recovery like someone who had just recovered from a serious illness, slow, cautious, and reluctant to believe that everything was truly all right. The Caldwell quarantine facility was dismantled piece by piece. The iron beds were removed, the oil lamps were taken down, the white lime stains on the floor were scraped away, revealing the old wood underneath, as if the town wanted to erase the traces of a memory they didn't know whether to keep or forget. Clara Whitmore still came every day, not because she needed to, but because bringing things to a proper conclusion was also part of her responsibility. She reviewed the handover list. She reiterated the procedures to the person assigned to take over. She answered technical questions concisely, accurately, and without exaggeration. The new employee is serious about their work. They don't show any signs of superiority or competitiveness. They simply stay in their assigned position. And it was this normalcy that made Clara realize one thing. The exception had lost its purpose. One afternoon, the town doctor came to see Clara. He no longer looked as exhausted as he had in the previous weeks. His shoulders were straighter, his voice was more steady. "She has given us more than I ever imagined," he said. "Not just the way of doing things, but the way of thinking." Clara nodded. "You'll do well," she replied. "As long as you remember, order isn't about controlling people, but about protecting them." He smiled, a very small smile. It wasn't a promise, but it was the consensus of those who had stood together on the brink. News of Clara's impending departure wasn't announced. It spread in Redwood Falls' own unique way, through hushed whispers, through longer-than-usual glances, through actions that weren't explicitly called farewells. Someone placed another bag of flour on the counter. Someone left a clean towel by the door. Someone knocked on Clara's door just to ask, "Do you need anything?" Clara accepted it all. No refusal, no explanation. Because she understood this was their way of saying thank you without hurting their own self-esteem. Samuel Reed did not repeat the same question. Nor did he press the matter. They lived their final days like any other, eating dinner late, talking little, and being mostly silent. One evening, as Samuel closed his shop earlier than usual, he said, "I won't ask you whether you're staying or leaving." Clara looked at him. "Because I know," he continued, "whatever you choose, you won't run away." Clara didn't answer immediately. She knew that in this moment, unnecessary words would only worsen what was already a heavy burden. The next morning, Clara woke up very early. She packed her belongings neatly. No more than when she first arrived at Redwood Falls. She wrote a short letter and left it on the kitchen table. Not a farewell. Just things that need to be said when one is calm enough to read them. Samuel didn't stop her. He helped her carry her luggage to the train station. No one saw them off, no curious glances. Only the steppe wind blows steadily, just like on the first day. Clara paused before boarding the train. She looked at Samuel, without haste, without regret. "I'm not going to disappear," she said. "It's just, I need to move on." Samuel nodded. "I know," he replied. "And whenever you stop, if you still want to talk, I'll still be here. Not a promise, just a non-binding point of reference." The train started moving. Redwood Falls receded into the distance, not as a place left behind, but as a place that had completed its part in Clara's life. In the train carriage, Clara sat by the window. She didn't think about victory. She didn't think about sacrifice. She thought about very specific things. Her breathing had stabilized, her shift was running smoothly, and people had learned to stand together. And she understood a person's true value lies not in how long they are kept, but in what they leave behind when they depart. In Redwood Falls, people continue to live. They don't talk much about Clara Whitmore, no statues, no legendary stories, but in later, more difficult times, when someone suggests rushing things, someone will say, "No, we'll do it like we did that time, slowly and properly." And nobody needs to explain which that time they're referring to. A few weeks later, Samuel received the letter. Not long. It's just a folded piece of paper. "I'm working in a smaller town. They're not settled yet, but they're learning. When things settle down, I'll write more." Samuel folded the letter and put it in the drawer. He didn't wait. But he didn't close the door either, because he understood. People like Clara don't belong in one place. They belong to periods when people need each other the most. Elsewhere, Clara Whitmore arrived in a new town. No titles, no lengthy introductions. Just one simple, familiar sentence. "I can help." And the story doesn't need to be repeated from the beginning. Because of what she had learned, it stayed with her, not as a burden, but as a way of life where she was no longer afraid of the light. Redwood Falls has changed very little over the years. The dirt road in front of the station still sloped gently to the west, where the steppe wind blew incessantly. The old wooden houses had been repaired but not altered in appearance. Windows were added, fences were replaced, but what had stood firm through many winters was not demolished. And it was precisely this lack of change that made Clara Whitmore realize she had returned. The train stopped on an early autumn morning. There were no long whistles, no waiting crowds, just the familiar rhythm of a town where there was no longer a need to rush. Clara stepped off the platform with her luggage light, just like in the old days. But this time she wasn't met with the gaze of a stranger. She stood still for a moment, taking a deep breath of the scent of old wood, dry earth, the scent of a place that had once been so deeply ingrained in her life. She didn't come because she was invited, nor was she there on assignment. She came because enough time had passed for things to be viewed calmly. Samuel Reed was standing in front of the grocery store when Clara walked past. He was a little older. His shoulders were still straight. His gaze was still calm. When he saw Clara, he wasn't in a hurry, not surprised. He simply put down the shopping cart, wiped his hands on his apron, and walked over. "You've arrived," he said. Not a question, just confirmation of something that needs no doubt. "Yes," Clara replied. "I've come to visit." Samuel nodded. He didn't ask about work. He didn't ask why now. He understood. There are returns that don't need a clear reason. They come when one is strong enough not to need to prove anything. They sat in the small kitchen at the back of the shop, where the afternoon light streamed through the window, just like before. Everything was still there, the old wooden table, the kettle, the once wobbly chair, now repaired to be sturdier. They spoke very little about this year's harvest, about the train that often arrives late, about the people who have left town and those who have stayed. No one mentioned the epidemic. It's not because of forgetting, it's because that memory has been placed in the right place. That afternoon, Clara took a walk through the town. She walked past what used to be the Caldwell quarantine station. The old barn had been repurposed as a storage shed. The wooden walls bore fresh repair marks, but the floor had been cleaned, with no trace of white lime. A group of children ran past, laughing and playing. No one knew that this place had once been the fragile boundary between life and death. And Clara felt relieved. The town doctor, now a different man, met Clara at the door of his clinic. He greeted her as if she were an old colleague, even though they had never worked together. "I've read the logs," he said. "We still use that shift system. It keeps everyone alert." Clara nodded. "Don't forget to change when necessary," she said. "The discipline of life is the discipline of knowing how to adjust." He smiled. No argument, no further questions. At Redwood Falls, people learned how to retain useful information without turning it into dogma. In the evening, a small meal was prepared, not a party, no speeches, just familiar faces sitting around a table, a few old faces, a few new ones. Some people looked at Clara for a little longer. Some nodded. Some said nothing. No one called her Dr. Clara, nor did anyone call her the town's saviour. They called her by her name, and that's enough. An elderly woman, a former night shift clerk, raised her cup of water and spoke very softly. "Thanks to the way things were done back then, we haven't forgotten each other." No one answered, but everyone understood. As night fell, Clara stood on the porch with Samuel. A cool breeze blew, the moon hung low in the sky. "Do you think you'll stay?" Samuel asked, his tone as if he were inquiring about the weather. Clara thought for a moment. "No," she replied after a moment. "But I'm not leaving in a hurry either." Samuel nodded. "Me too," he said. "I don't wait. But I always keep the door open." They stood side by side. No promises, no plans. It's the kind of intimacy between people who have been through things that don't need to be said again. In the following days, Clara stayed at Redwood Falls as a regular guest. She helped with a few difficult cases, offered advice when asked, did not interfere unnecessarily. She found that order remained intact, not because she was there, but because it had become a habit of the community. One morning, Clara returned to the train station. The train was about to arrive. Samuel went with her, just like last time. No long goodbyes. "I'll write it," Clara said. Samuel nodded. "I know." When the train arrived, Clara disembarked. She looked back at Redwood Falls, not as a place to return to forever, but as a landmark where she had learned that true value doesn't need to be held tightly, it just needs to be placed in the right place. The train started moving. In Redwood Falls, life goes on. People repair the fences, classes open, winter preparations begin. And when someone suggests skipping a step to speed things up, someone will say, "No, I'm doing it right." No need to mention anyone's name, no need to recount past events, because once doing what's right becomes a habit, the initiator can leave quietly. In another town, Clara Whitmore stepped off the train. Again, the luggage was compact. Again, the gaze was calm. And once again the familiar, unpretentious saying, "I can help." Time goes on. The story doesn't end. It is simply passed from hand to hand, from place to place, from person to person, each time more quietly and more enduringly. Fame doesn't come by invitation. It comes like the wind, without asking permission, without explanation, and often after everything is already done. Clara Whitmore realized this in a small town to the north, where she stopped after leaving Redwood Falls for the second time. The town had no large train station, just a low platform, a few warehouses, and an old medical clinic with peeling, whitewashed walls. She came here as usual, no lengthy introductions, no displaying of diplomas, no recounting of past events. "I can help," she said. Initially, everything felt familiar. She scheduled shifts. She required record-keeping. She maintained just enough discipline to prevent burnout. No one asked who she was. They just noticed things were running more smoothly. But then, one small detail changed everything. One afternoon, a merchant visited the medical station. He brought letters from the south, including an old newspaper, folded in quarters and yellowed with age. While waiting to be bandaged, he read it to pass the time. In the newspaper corner there was a short article. "Redwood Falls and the pandemic is over. A lesson in community discipline." The article didn't mention many names. But there was one line that made Clara stop short when she heard it. A woman with medical training, not holding an official position, but who played a key role in organizing the healthcare system. It has no name, but enough for those who know to know. The news spread faster than Clara expected, not through the press, but through curiosity. "Have you ever been to Redwood Falls?" "Are you the person in that article?" Clara neither denied nor confirmed it. She continued working, but attitudes around us began to change. Some people listened more attentively, some were more submissive than necessary, some called her doctor, even though she had never asked for it, and that's what made Clara feel insecure. It wasn't because she was afraid of being discovered. Rather, it was because she understood that fame distorts the order. It makes people listen because of the speaker, not because of what is being said. One evening, as Clara was tidying up her notebook, the head of the health center walked in. He was a decent, hard-working man, but he couldn't hide his hesitation. "They suggested," he said slowly, "that you be appointed as the official coordinator." Clara looked up. "Why?" he exhaled. "Because things are better when she's here, and because her name puts their minds at ease." That was the answer Clara feared most. It's not because she's undeserving, but because the reassurance derived from fame is always short-lived. "If I accept," Clara asked, "when I leave, will everything still stand?" The man remained silent. That question he had never asked himself. Clara closed the book. "Then I won't accept it," she said. That decision caused a stir. Some people are disappointed, some people don't understand. "She could be of more help," they said. "With the position, she could do much more." Clara shook her head. "No," she replied. "There is a position where I would hear more. But I'm not sure people would do any better when I'm no longer there. Some people are annoyed." "Are you afraid of responsibility?" Clara looked straight ahead. "No," she said. "I'm afraid they'll rely on me instead of relying on the right way to do things." Those words weren't easy to hear, but they were true. And that's why not everyone accepts it. Some people began to distance themselves. Some whispered that Clara was difficult to work with, that she didn't know how to take advantage of opportunities. Clara didn't object.
She learned a lesson at Redwood Falls. When fame comes, controversy only makes it bigger. She quietly did what she usually did, training others, not through lectures, but through assigning tasks. She lets others present the data, let others decide on shifts.
Let others take responsibility for mistakes, with support from behind the scenes, not the spotlight. Some people do well, some people struggle. But as the weeks went by, the health centre no longer revolved around Clara. And that's when the news arrived. A letter from the East, thick paper, red seal, a formal invitation and to join a regional health committee, a clear title, real authority. The letter was written very politely. Her field experience is exactly what we're looking for. Clara finished reading. She closed the book, not happy, not proud. It's just a familiar question coming back. Am I still doing the right thing if I step into the light? She thought of Redwood Falls, of this small medical clinic, of other places she had been to without anyone knowing their names. Reputation can help open doors, but it can also close smaller doors, where work requires more humility than power. Clara wrote a reply. Brief. Thank you, but I must decline. No explanation, no justification. The person in charge of the health centre asked her, "Aren't you regretting it?" Clara thought for a moment. "No," she replied. "I only choose where I can be most useful." A few weeks later, Clara left town. No one saw them off. No one held them back. But when she left, everything continued to function. That was the only sign she needed. Elsewhere, Clara began anew. No name, no story. It's just work. Done right, handed over, and left alone when it's no longer needed. The reputation is still there, somewhere in the background, like a shadow. But Clara didn't turn around to look, because she chose, a long time ago, that her value lies not in being named, but in being able to leave and everything will still stand. And in a world constantly rushing to find someone to celebrate, Clara Whitmore continues to walk a path few choose, the path of those who work until they are no longer needed. There were no obvious warning signs, no fever, no accident. Just one morning, Clara Whitmore got up more slowly than usual and realized her knees didn't respond as quickly as they used to. She sat down, tied her shoelaces, and waited for her breathing to stabilize. Don't panic, don't be surprised, because Clara understood very well that no one could keep going forever with the strength of youth. The town where she works now is smaller than Redwood Falls. It's sparsely populated. The health centre only has 3 main staff members. The work isn't as demanding as during previous outbreaks, but it's regular, repetitive, and requires sustained alertness. And it was here that Clara began to realize a new limit. It's not about knowledge, it's about the body. There were night shifts that required her to recover more time. Some mornings her hands trembled slightly as she wrote. Not enough for anyone else to notice, but enough that she couldn't fool herself. For the first time in years, Clara did something she had always avoided. She took an afternoon off. It's not because of illness, it's because the body is saying, enough is enough. The person in charge of the health centre, a young woman named Annabelle, looked at Clara with a hint of concern. "You don't need to be here every day," Anna said. "We can manage." Clara nodded. "She can spin," she said. "But she's not yet used to keeping the rhythm for others to spin with." Anna remained silent. She's talented, hard-working, intelligent. But Clara saw in Anna something she herself had possessed when she was young, the belief that doing well was enough. And Clara knew that if she didn't say it now, there would never be a more opportune time. That afternoon, Clara sat with Anna in the room behind the medical station. No records, no lists. There were only 2 chairs and a kettle of hot water. "What do you think?" Clara asked slowly. "Keeps a place standing when the best people aren't around?" Anna thought for a moment. Discipline? Procedures? Training? Clara listened. Then she shook her head very slightly. "Those things are necessary," she said, "but they're not enough." Anna looked at Clara, waiting. "What keeps a place standing," Clara continued, "is the attitude of those who remain when there is no one else to rely on." Anna frowned. "Attitude? Can it be taught?" Clara smiled. "No," she replied, "but it can be transmitted." From that day on, Clara changed her way of working. She's no longer the first one to show up every morning. She doesn't fix every mistake immediately. She allows others to make mistakes, within safe limits, and more importantly, she lets them correct their own mistakes. Anna was initially very upset. "We could do it faster," she said, "if you just said so directly." Clara nodded. "Yes," she replied, "but if I speak instead, you won't learn how to speak when I'm not here." That was an unpleasant lesson, not just with Anna, but with Clara herself. Because every time Clara saw someone else struggling, her instinct was to step in, to correct them, to do it quickly and efficiently. But this time, she didn't take a step. It wasn't because she was tired. It was because she understood that if she continued to do things on her behalf, she wouldn't truly be handing over the responsibility. One evening, after a difficult shift, Anna sat down next to Clara, her voice tired but alert. "I understand," she said. "You didn't teach me how to work. You taught me how to take responsibility." Clara didn't answer immediately. She looked out the window where it was getting dark. "No," she said, "I taught you to take responsibility when there's no one else to blame." Anna nodded very slowly. In the days that followed, Clara began to withdraw more noticeably. It didn't disappear, but it stands on the edge. She visited the health center less often, but each time she went, she observed more closely. She didn't ask, "Have you tried my method?" She asked, "Does that method help people stand firmer?" If the answer was yes, she remained silent. If it was no, she asked further, "So how will you fix it?" No judgment, no comparison. It's simply a matter of shifting the focus back to consequences and accountability. One morning, Clara realized she was no longer being called when there was an urgent matter. It wasn't because they were excluded. It was because someone else had already stepped in to resolve the issue. That feeling was both a sense of relief and emptiness. That evening, Clara sat alone, writing a letter. Do not send immediately, just a few scattered lines about the places she'd been. The people who'd stood up for her, the places where she used to be the center and no longer is. She wasn't sad, but she understood very well. A phase was coming to an end. A few weeks later, Clara caught a mild cold, nothing serious, but this time she stayed home for 2 whole days. The health station is still operational, not perfect. There are minor flaws, but don't panic. When Clara returned, Anna handed her the notebook. "We've rearranged the shifts," Anna said, "and we've added a new rule." Clara looked. The rules were handwritten, the handwriting still fresh. "Don't make decisions alone when you're tired." Clara put the notebook down. She remained silent for a very long time. Then she nodded. "You've understood the most important thing," Clara said. "Not how to cure the disease, but how to protect people, including yourself." In the afternoon, Clara took a walk through the town. She noticed she was walking slower, but she didn't feel weaker, because now she no longer carries the burden of having to stay there forever. She understood. Each generation has a role to play, and her role was no longer to be the one in charge, but to ensure that when she left, no one would collapse without her. Clara Whitmore sat down on a bench in front of the health clinic. The sun is gentle. The breeze is just right. She thought of Redwood Falls and other places, and for the first time she allowed herself to think about a different question. Not what else could she do, Steve, but rather, who would be ready to continue when I stop? And with that question, Clara knew she was closer than ever to what she had been striving for her whole life, a timely withdrawal, leaving no void, only the foundation. No day is marked as the last day. Clara Whitmore didn't hang her coat on the hook and say goodbye. She didn't tidy up her desk with a sense of finality. She didn't announce that she wouldn't be coming anymore starting tomorrow. Her stopping came slowly and naturally, like a long-time walker suddenly realizing they've reached their destination and don't need to take another step. That morning began like any other day. Clara woke up early but wasn't in a hurry. She made tea, sat by the window, and watched the light gradually spread across the low rooftops. Her knees still ached slightly. Not painful enough to warrant attention, but enough to remind her that time doesn't need to be shocking to be heard. She put on her coat and went outside. The health clinic opened on time, but Clara didn't go in right away. She stood on the opposite side of the road observing. Annabelle arrived first. She spoke with the night shift worker, checked the logbook, adjusted the list. Don't ask Clara, don't seek her confirming gaze. Clara recognized a very strange feeling, not of being left behind, but of being placed in the right place. For years, she thought, if she weren't there, everything would fall apart. Now she finds that rhythm remains steady, no longer needing to adjust to her pace. She returned home. It's not because I'm sad, it's because there's no longer a valid reason to stand out there. At lunchtime, a boy brought a basket of bread. He didn't say much. He just set it down and ran off. In the afternoon, a woman stopped by and asked Clara if she needed any cold medicine. Clara shook her head. We've already made arrangements, the woman said, as if afraid Clara would worry. There's nothing to worry about. Clara nodded. Good, she replied. No further words. Anna arrived in the evening. She wasn't in a hurry. She didn't bring any notebooks, just sit down. Tomorrow, Anna said, I'll be on the morning shift. This week I've reassigned the night shift staff. Clara looked at her. Are you sure? She asked. Anna didn't answer immediately. She thought for a moment, then nodded. Yes, she said. And if there's anything wrong, I'll correct it. Clara smiled very slightly. Then, you don't need me anymore. Anna looked up. That statement didn't carry any sadness. It was simply a confirmation. No, Anna said slowly. We don't need you there anymore, but we still need your way of thinking. Clara did not answer, because it was something she had been waiting for years, and also the hardest thing to hear without wanting to step up again. That night, Clara didn't fall asleep right away. She sat down to write. Not a report. Not a guide, just a few lines for myself. When others can move on without looking back, that's not being forgotten. It's being accomplished. The next morning, Clara did not go to the health centre. No one came looking for them. No one called. By noon, everything was still quiet. By afternoon, there was laughter coming from the backyard of the station, something rarely heard before. Clara stepped out onto the porch and listened. She didn't feel empty. There was just a brief moment of silence. In the days that followed, Clara lived at a slower pace. She went for a walk, replanted her little garden, read the books she used to bring with her but hadn't had time to open. Sometimes people stopped by to ask for advice. Clara didn't refuse, but she didn't make the decision for him. She asked in return, "What do you think?" "If it were you, what would you do?" And then she fell silent. That's how she stayed, without taking up space. A week later, a difficult case arose, not serious, but complicated. Anna didn't go to ask Clara. She handled it. There were minor mistakes, but nobody panicked. Then she went to see Clara. "I think I'll do it differently next time," Anna said. Clara nodded. "She learned," she replied. "Not from my words, but from taking responsibility herself." Anna sat still for a while. "Don't you regret it?" she asked. "Not being there every day anymore?" Clara gazed into the distance. "Yes," she said. "But if I were to go back out of regret, then what I taught would be ineffective." Anna understands. Several months passed. Clara is no longer referred to as the person at the health center. She's just Clara. People greeted her on the street. They asked about her health. They didn't ask for her professional advice anymore, unless absolutely necessary. And Clara realized this was the retirement she had never imagined. It's not about withdrawing from life. It's about withdrawing from the center. One late autumn afternoon, Anna brought a notebook. "We continued writing," she said. "Not exactly the way she used to, but in a way that suited us." Clara opened it. Different font, different layout, but the spirit is still there. She closed the notebook. "Good," Clara said. "Don't keep it like me. Keep it alive." That day, Clara understood very clearly. She is no longer the one who needs to step up when things are shaky, because things are no longer shaky. And that is the quietest success a person can achieve. No one acknowledges it, no one honors it, but order remains. People remain connected. And when mistakes happen, they correct them without waiting for anyone. In the evening, Clara sat alone, watching the sky darken. She thought of Redwood Falls and other places, and she smiled, not out of nostalgia, but knowing that what she left behind no longer depended on her presence. Clara Whitmore stopped. Not because of exhaustion, not because of being replaced, because the small world around her had learned to stand on its own 2 feet. And in that silence, there was no loss. There is only one timely completion. There is no anniversary date. No one suggested erecting a memorial. There was no meeting to recognize his contributions. Clara Whitmore lived in that town like someone who had finished their work and left the rest for others to continue. If someone were to ask, what did Clara do here? The answer would usually be a brief silence, followed by a very simple statement. She helped us know how to do it right. No more, no less. At the health center, everything ran on a rhythm that had become ingrained. No one mentioned Clara's way, but everyone knew when to stop to check, when to ask someone else before making a decision, when to rest so as not to make a decision when they were too tired. These things aren't found in written rules. They're in the way people look at each other before speaking, in the subtle pause before each choice. Annabelle realized that most clearly. One morning, she discovered a mistake in the shift scheduling. It wasn't a big one. It didn't have any consequences. She corrected it immediately, then paused for a moment. In the past, she would blame herself, or find an excuse. Now she notes in the margin of her logbook, "Corrected. Cross-check next time." No hiding, no excuses. She remembered Clara, not in her image, but in the way she used to slowly put pen to paper before writing. People change in the market too. Not everyone realized it right away. But gradually, the noisy arguments subsided. Sellers became accustomed to weighing the goods again if in doubt. Buyers no longer automatically assumed that faster is better. Once, a young person was frustrated because the goods inspection was slowing down the delivery. An elderly person spoke very softly. "Slow down a bit, so we don't spend all day fixing it." No one laughed. But everyone understood. The children in the town grew up without knowing Clara Whitmore's name. They didn't hear about the plague as a legend, but they learned one thing very early on. No one is allowed to neglect their work just because they think someone else will correct it. At the small school west of town, the teacher hung up a handwritten sign. Doing things right from the start saves everyone a lot of trouble later. No signature, no need. One afternoon, a stranger visited the town. He inquired about the woman who used to organize the health station. Anna received him. She listened to the question, then answered, "She's not here anymore, but if you want to know how she does, stay a day and observe." The stranger stayed. He observed that the health center was neither rushed nor sluggish. He saw that people discussed issues before making decisions. He saw that mistakes were acknowledged without being publicly shamed. At the end of the day, he said, "You girls have a very solid system." Anna shook her head. "No," she replied, "we have good habits." That difference, not everyone understands it, but that's what Clara left behind. It's not a rigid system. Rather, it's the ability to adapt as circumstances change. At home, Clara lived a quiet life. She reads books, writes a few lines, plants trees. Occasionally, she would hear news from the health center, not to intervene, but to reassure herself that she didn't need intervention. Sometimes Anna would stop by bringing some hot bread. "We've just changed the way we record information," she said. "It's not the same as before, but it's more efficient." Clara nodded. "As long as you know why you're changing," she replied. "Not to be different, but to be better." Anna smiled. "Rest assured, Ma'am, we don't cling to the old ways just because we're used to them, and we don't innovate just to show off." Clara remained silent. In that silence, she realized clearly, legacy doesn't lie in others doing the same things as you, but in them knowing why you did them that way. One evening, the town lost power due to strong winds. Don't panic, don't shout. They lit oil lamps. They checked on the elderly first. They divided the tasks among themselves. No one gave orders. No one waited for instructions. The power came back on the next morning. Someone said, "It went well last night." Another person replied, "Yeah, just like always." That statement, so small, is the clearest evidence that heritage is deeply ingrained in life. Clara heard that and smiled. No pride, no emotion. It was just a silent confirmation. A few months later, a proposal was made to name the health center after Clara. Anna was the first to object. "No need," she said. "If you name it, people will think it's hers alone, while what she left behind is meant to be owned by no one else." The proposal was withdrawn. No argument. No one mentioned it again. One day at the end of the year, Clara took a walk past the health center. She didn't go inside. She just stood outside and watched. Anna is talking to someone new. She explains things very patiently. She's not bossy. She doesn't show off her experience. Clara turned away. She didn't need to be seen, and she didn't need to be remembered in that moment, because that moment no longer belonged to her. That evening, Clara sat by the window, writing the final lines in the small notebook she had carried with her for many years. "If one day no one mentions my name, but everyone still does things correctly, then that's when I can rest easy." She closed the notebook. Outside, the town lights are coming on. No one knew what Clara was thinking, and it didn't matter. because her true legacy needs no words to tell. It manifests itself in things done correctly, consistently, and without anyone needing to take credit for them. And when that happens, the person leaving the legacy can quietly step back, without regret, without fear, with only a firm belief that what was worth keeping has been given back to the right people at the right time. Clara Whitmore has aged in a way that is very difficult to recognize, not through noticeable wrinkles, not through a moment of vulnerability that would cause others to worry. She grew old by needing less each day to feel content. One early winter morning, Clara woke up earlier than usual, not for any particular reason. It was simply a habit remaining from years of keeping track of time, monitoring her breathing, and carefully considering every small decision. She sat by the window, watching the thin layer of snow fall on the roof of the house opposite. There's nothing to do, there's nowhere to go, and that, for the first time in her life, didn't make her feel uneasy. Clara brewed tea, holding the old notebook that had accompanied her through many towns. The first pages were meticulously recorded: shifts, symptoms, mistakes, adjustments. The later pages became less crowded, the writing slower, and there were fewer figures. Then came the final pages. Only very short sentences remained. Doing things right isn't always understood. Order doesn't come naturally, but it can be learned. It's harder to leave at the right time than to stay. Clara reread it, not to memorize it, but to confirm that she had come far enough that she didn't need to return to the old questions. Annabelle stopped by at lunchtime. Don't bring any notebooks, don't ask for advice, just bring a bag of apples and a short message. The health centre will be holding another training session for new staff. Not about technical skills, but about how to stay calm when things get chaotic. Clara smiled. How will you teach? She asked. Anna thought for a moment. I don't lecture, she said. I let them observe, and then let them do it themselves, just like you used to do. Clara shook her head very slightly. Not like me, she said, like how you girls need to be. Anna understood, and that reassured Clara more than any compliment. When Anna left, Clara was left alone. She thought of Redwood Falls, where she had begun not with confidence, but with the silence necessary for survival. She thought of Samuel Reed, the man who hadn't asked her who she was, but simply asked, "Shall we go home?" She thought of other places, places she had been to and from, leaving no name behind, only a kinder way of working than before. And then Clara thought of the question that had haunted her whole life. If only one person can save the town, but that person has to remain hidden, should they step forward? Now the answer is quite clear. It's not a yes or no question. Instead, it is step forward when needed, and withdraw when no longer needed. The true value of a person lies not in how long they are around, but in whether things continue to stand strong when they are no longer around. Clara did not leave behind students in the traditional sense. There are no schools named after her. There are no standardized teaching methods. What she left behind is harder to name. That is, the habit of pausing before making a decision. The acceptance that mistakes are part of responsibility, and the belief that no one should be the center of attention forever. That afternoon, Clara went for a walk outside. It was snowing lightly. The road was deserted. A young neighbor greeted her and asked, "Do you need any help?" Clara shook her head. "No," she replied, "but thank you for asking." That question, asked naturally, made her realize she had come full circle from being suspected to being relied upon, and finally back to being an ordinary person who no longer needed to prove anything. That evening, Clara sat down and wrote the final entry in her notebook. Not long. I've lived long enough to know that silence isn't always a sign of weakness, and speaking up isn't always a sign of courage. True courage is doing the right thing, even if no one promises to remember you. She closed the ledger. Put it in the drawer, it's not locked. If someone were to open it someday, it wouldn't matter, because the things that matter more have been alive in the world for a very long time now. Outside, the town was shrouded in night, no sirens, no hurried footsteps. It was simply a steady rhythm of life, something Clara had sacrificed her youth to help others preserve. And now that the rhythm has found its footing, she allows herself to sit down completely. No waiting, no regrets. She was just an older woman, having done her part, and didn't need the world's confirmation anymore. Clara Whitmore. Story isn't just about the plague or the Wild West. It's about so many of us, people who have been misunderstood, who have remained silent to maintain peace, who have done the right thing when no one else was on their side. If you're at a stage where your value hasn't yet been recognized, remember, true value doesn't disappear just because you're late. It just needs to be seen at the right time, or powerful enough not to need to be seen. If this story resonates with you, please like, share it with a friend you think might need it, and subscribe to the channel to continue following these slow, profound stories for hearts that have weathered many storms but still choose to live with kindness. Thank you for staying until the very last line.